Alrighty, welcome back to the Natty News Daily channel. Different kind of episode today. It's me, Dan, rolling solo, introducing the episode to a certain degree here. Wanted to give some context before we get into the meat of things. I sat down with Josh Bradshaw, who is a good friend of mine and my coach. Um, Handles my nutrition, and we've been working together since 2021. We've had two competitive seasons together. Um, so I've had three competitive seasons, two of which under Josh, but I've been working with Josh since 2021. Competed in 2021, and then competed just this past year in 2024, which was a quite successful season for me, winning the overall at WNBF Ontario, in my WNBF Pro card there, making my WNBF Pro debut, and then showing my best at Mr. America in October. But not gonna talk much about that so much as my transition out of prep, which has been by far the most successful uh, post-show phase that I've ever had. Um, Without any binging, um, without the massive swings in body weight, swings in um, fat distribution, wonky things like that. I've taken a more of a slightly more of a reverse dieting type approach. I wouldn't call it a pure reverse diet because I did uh, increase food very quickly rather than just eating dirt, right? So, but I'm only up what I'll call 15 pounds from uh, my lowest body weight during prep 20 weeks later. Um, so really being up about 12 pounds realistically. Um, from my peaked weight, which I'll show you some comparisons real quick. I'll show some photos since Josh and I just discussed without sharing much. Um, so you can visualize what I'm talking about here. If I can figure out how to share my screen, give me one second. I have it up. Let's do it. Okay. So pull this up here. So here's the visuals, so you can take a look at it and see, what has transpired in these last 20 weeks. Um, I can mention technically 15 pounds from my lowest weigh-in. On the left here, 165 pounds. This was my flattest, lowest body weight day. Um, so it is worth noting I am a little bit flat depleted here. And my peaked weight was close to like 168. Um, and then on the right was taken, I think, just this past Sunday, just a few, yeah, no, I'm recording this on Sunday. It was taken a week ago. Week ago, at a little over 180 pounds. That was a little bit of a higher weigh-in, but um, up roughly 12 pounds from my peak weight, about 15 pounds from my lowest weigh-in. Like I said, over the course of 20 weeks. So a pretty steady rate of gain. Like I said, I've kept things under lock, under control, regulated, no binging. Um, and yeah, it's been a quite a successful um, 20 weeks. Opened up a huge runway for me to continue to off season. I'm holding condition in especially my legs because I tend to be hold more body fat in my lower body. Holding, still detail through my upper quad, striations through my VMO. You can see maybe I still have some light glute striations, which are more visible. I'll show you. I'll show off a little bit. Um, Still have glute striations, still have quad striations, which for me in the 180s is pretty wild. Training is going really well. But like I said, this has been the most successful phase that I've had to date. I've taken, like I said, a little bit more of I don't even want to say unconventional approach, but a more measured approach and more atypical approach from what I have seen. And applied. Like I said, sit down with Josh. Uh, that recording will become right after this. You'll listen to that where we go into detail of how I approach things, the numbers, um, how that went, you know, what things I did in order to apply this approach, and hopefully you guys get something out of this episode and learn something, or uh, take in a perspective of an athlete coming out of stage, because I know this is a challenging phase, for probably the most challenging phase for a bodybuilder is this post show phase. So hopefully somebody gets something out of this, and yeah, let me know what you think of the episode. But that's enough of me rambling. I'm rambling a lot. So, um, like I said, we'll right after this, it'll get into the actual discussion between me and Josh, where we get into the details and talk through things. Enjoy.
All right, so this is a bit of an atypical transformation. I think it warrants some longer form explanation and discussion. So wanted to record a video to give you guys context, as well as let Dan share his experience through this reverse diet. So as you guys know, we had a very successful contest season last year. Dan won his pro card at the WMBF Ontario, and then brought his best package to date at the Mr. A. So here we're going to go through the details of his reverse, as you guys have already seen. The side-by-side transformation up roughly about 12 to 15 pounds, depending on the day, and seemingly still holding conditioning that resembles the later stages of prep. So dieted down to 165. That's about the flattest, lowest scale weights that we had. These pre-peak calories were roughly about 1,800 to 2,000, depending on the day. We go through peak week. This was for his final show. Step on stage at about 168. We get off as a celebration meal, enjoys the rest of the evening, and then essentially that next day, it got right back to the plan, right? And I think only about 1 in 10 athletes get this right. So we immediately made an increase. We bumped things up by 1,200 to 1,300 calories, depending on the day. Body weight average that ranged about 168 to 170 for the first month after making this increase. So essentially what we wanted to do was make a larger increase right out of the gate. Let's get out of a deficit. Let's see scale weight increase. And then every single week that we didn't see an increase, we would make a small bump to food, right? So essentially that first week post-show, we saw things dissipate. Obviously, we're not eating at those loading day numbers. So we're going to see a minor reduction in scale weight, provided that we didn't binge, which Dan was very controlled with his diet through that point in time. So scale weight came down from his stage weight just a little bit, but not to his pre-peak weight. So we knew that, okay, we're probably in somewhat of a surplus, but not as much as we would need to be. So we ran those numbers for a little bit longer, and then we were quick to make another adjustment. And like I said, essentially every single week that we didn't see his average come up, we would make an increase. And these were about 200 to 300 calorie increases. Conditioning held tight, and his body was very, very efficient in processing these calories for the entirety of the reverse diet. So here we are, just over 20 weeks, I guess.
Yeah, I think it's 21, approach
Yeah.
21. Yeah.
And we're eating, or you're eating 1,700 more calories depending on the day.
Yeah.
And yeah, the cool thing here was that every time we saw an increase, this scale weight increase always outpaced changes in conditioning, which we knew that was a very, very good sign. So again, I think this is something that, if you're looking to bring your absolute best to your next competition season, nailing your reverse out of your contest diet is it's going to be crucial because we're at such a point now where we have the largest runway. And if I had to guess, the rate limiter of this phase before we have to reduce food is going to be appetite and not body comp. What would you say?
Yeah, I would agree.
Yeah. So now that you guys are up to speed, we'll have Dan just share his experiences and what he's kind of noticed throughout this reverse diet and just kind of how it compares to uh, previous seasons. Because I'll shut up in just a second. What the biggest pushback here is, okay, you're not in a position to continue dieting, at the end of a contest season. If you reach true conditioning, you need to get in, to a very, very large surplus. You need hormonal recovery, so on and so forth. And many athletes have bought into that and might not necessarily need to be as extreme. All right, so I'll let you start.
Yeah, so I mean it's worth noting, I guess a few things is yes, I got some pushback, as to especially like the 4 week point out, like why are you still shredded? But it's also worth noting that it's not like I was like slowly building calories up from 1800. Like I said, we introduced like an immediate like 1300 calories. Um, into my diet, and conditioning just held tight, just held a very full look, no rapid fluctuations in scale weight. Gym performance was good. In general, allowed me to, as we talked about, really keep my head on straight, no massive fluctuations in body weight or weird storage of weight in weird areas or water retention, you know. Um, Felt good, really. It felt like in a good rhythm. It definitely made the transition a lot smoother than a lot of other approaches, and approaches that I've taken in the past were and not even necessarily intentionally, but just not being able to control myself food wise. Um, so yeah, do you want to talk? Where do you want to go from there? Did you want to talk about the routine side of things, or
Yeah,
where do
we,
you
we
want to
can
take
do
it from
that.
there?
I always say that the key to nailing a reverse diet is in routines and keeping everything as similar as possible. What happens, I think the biggest thing that really just derails most competitors is that they start to throw in new foods, they start to do different things, they get out of their routine, and what happens is when you start to toss in foods that you haven't had in a while, especially foods that would even taste good in your off season, you're going to spike cravings like through the roof. And
Yeah,
it's not even going to be like a matter of willpower. It's going to be, you're fighting against that reward response, right? That, talking about like neurochemistry at that point, where it doesn't matter how hungry you are or how disciplined you might be. You're fighting a losing battle at that point, right? And
yeah,
hunger is just going to go through the roof. And so I think that was a big thing. It's just, hey, same foods, just more of them, because on
yeah.
paper it's going to be amazing, right? Because we're 1,200 up, and that's a lot more food to work with. So I think you
You have
know
to be mindful. Yeah.
yeah, getting through that first month, that seems to be where most people break. And if you can get through, the first 4 weeks or so, it gets tremendously easier after that.
Yeah, so I think a few things with that. Like you think about like during a prep, you kind of slowly get into this thing where you're removing foods and reducing palatability and being mindful about, adding more voluminous foods and just being mindful about things. And I think reversing to like something you were doing 8 months prior immediately is just a bad idea, rather than slowly reversing things back to, over the course of time, rather than just rapidly reintroducing what you were doing 9 months ago, right? I think makes a difference. And then we've talked about it, and I know I've mentioned um, having like we ran higher calories during my peak and higher carbohydrate numbers throughout my peak. And with those peaks, I kind of had an established routine, and because I was in during those peaks, I was eating very similar foods, nicely digesting foods, nothing super crazy. And my um, new numbers coming out of prep were very similar actually to my peaking numbers in terms of just amount of food. So I'm like, okay, I can just basically continue like I'm just still peaking. Maybe like small adjustments, like 100 calories, whatever, maybe a little bit more fat. Like very like, but realistically, like it was like 95% similar to what I was eating during my peak. So I had an established routine from my peaks that I was coming out of. So I could just keep running that routine and running that routine rather than, completely overhauling everything, right? Like you go from like a diet phase and then just overhaul and just start, well, I gotta add food. What am I gonna add? Like, okay, let's just add pizza. Like it's just makes things a lot more of a smoother transition. And with the understanding that like over time you can slowly titrate those things back in, right? Like over like eventually you can kind of get to the point where those palatable foods can be eaten in moderation and not binged on. So those don't need to stay out forever. And yeah, you can slowly titrate them back in. But I think that's just a more responsible and reasonable approach rather than the more. It's actually a less extreme approach, really. So
Yeah, yeah, I would say so too. Um, yeah, so for the listeners, Dan's peak, we spread out, a similar amount of carbohydrates over more days than a traditional peaking approach. We found that his body just needed more time to reach fullness, and it really we were able to achieve a greater amount of fullness if we spread it out that way. And so that's why food was somewhat similar to
yeah,
where we would eventually take things post show is because we've spread things out that way. But that's huge.
yeah, not running rapid backload protocols for
Yeah,
that like eating, yeah, I'm not coming out of prep eating rapid backload amounts of food. Just
yeah,
thinking about that.
yeah, like
Yeah.
900 carbs. Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, hey, a lot of people do that with,
Oh,
the
I'm not even criticizing the method. It's more so like I'm thinking about like if you were to try to replicate if you're running a rapid backload, don't replicate your peaks after prep.
right. Yeah, yeah. I
Anyway,
think it's debatable. When people say that it's, why continue to stress your body, more through, a diet that's still somewhat rigorous after a show. And I would say that it's kind of up for debate, like what's truly more stressful on your system, because
I would completely debate that and say it's way
yeah,
more stressful to do the opposite.
because when you binge and you see that the look that it creates, right? You're just like a watery mess. And it's like your body cannot be in a stress-free environment, right? That has to be an additional stressor on your system because you're coming from a place where you're accustomed to eating, next to nothing, and now you're overloading your GI tract with just, a ridiculous amount of food that you'll never touch, even in, the deepest parts of your off season. So I have to think that that is the more stressful approach, right? And you can see it in that, you probably got that question. I certainly did. Like, well, why are you still so lean? Like, well, but it's like, I'm not keeping my calories super low. Like, we're
Yeah.
1,700 up from where we had ended things. It's just that when you don't, you know, binge stress your system like that, your body is going to be in such a good place to handle nutrients, and
Oh yeah.
you're going to be able to make, the best possible use of like a decent amount of food, provided that you titrate things up in an appropriate manner. So yeah, I think that set us up really, really nicely for a big push this off season, and I think
Well,
that
you got to think like
yeah, it's just going to create, even more muscle accrued throughout the rest of the off season.
I mean, you think like a lot of it's just like holding on to conditioning is just being like constantly just full to the brim all the time. It's like coming out like, I've been basically full to the brim for whatever 21 weeks. So it's like, yeah, conditioning and without those rapid spikes, like, yeah, conditioning is going to show through more. And yeah, I think just the lower stress environment, I think I've added muscle. Yeah,
Yeah.
lots of factors working in my favor.
So at this time point compared to your previous season, how would you compare the two? Like in just how you felt at 20 weeks post show in 21, 20 weeks post show in 25.
Yeah, I'd say physically just as good. The I if not even a little bit better. Hormonally roughly the same, I would say. Um, roughly the same. And then mentally, psychologically, I was pretty okay at 20 weeks after last go around, but definitely better. But like those first 8 weeks or so, um, much better, like much better, not even comparable. Um,
Yeah. It's
but yeah,
hard
I'd say
for another 4 weeks, would you say?
what's
Like
that?
it's hard for another 4 weeks, like post show. It's like we made an increase, but we're still very hungry, right? But then after that
It's
month or so,
it's
it's
hard
like,
to set an exact number. I'd say it's probably a little longer than that, but it's like it's a sliding scale. It's like it gets easier as you go, right?
yeah.
It's
And
like
the
yeah.
trade-off is like, okay, what's another 4 to 6 weeks, right? If it means putting you in a place where you could extend your next gaining phase by how much more time?
Oh yeah. Well, that's what I mean. We've talked about like I'm up like basically 12, 13 pounds from my peaked weight right now. With still glute lines and like my runway is enormous. Like it's still huge. I mean, my body weight right now, like in the morning, is like 180, like right around 180. And my peak off season weight's usually close to 200. So like theoretically that gives me another 20 pounds of runway I still have if food doesn't get completely to the point, which is probably going to be the rate limiting factor. But it's like it's yeah, you have such a much bigger, longer runway um with this type of approach. I mean, if hunger didn't become an issue, which again we'll see, we'll see how things go. I could end up spending the entire year in a surplus, like plus the 3 months coming out of prep, 3 months, so 15 months in a surplus without ever having to touch even a mini cut, right? Like I said, we'll probably end up having to pull the trigger on one just because food gets so damn high, but still, it's just yeah.
Yeah, yeah, I would say so. And that's how many more weeks of uninterrupted training, and think about it like this. You're basically, would you say you're pretty close to, peak off season strength at this point? It's like how much more time are we
Roughly.
spend at, peak training at a place where we're very sensitive to food? It's like that's like,
Yeah.
you can't tell me there's a better place to spend your off season, you
I
know?
really don't think training recovered any more slowly than it has in the past. And it's also, you have to be mindful and careful about which numbers you compare, right? Because leverages are also just very different dependent on body weight. Because I noticed like right now, like all of my numbers are at all-time highs except for a couple, and those couple are all the movements that are very leverage dependent. Like my squat is not at what it was, but like without that additional cushion of fat, it's almost a different movement. Like it really is kind of a different movement. And even like when I started my prep, um, last year. That's the movement where like I lost like 20 pounds in that lift within like 3 weeks because like we dropped a lot of body weight off of, and my legs got substantially leaner, and I could feel it. I'm like, I don't have the the cushion out of the hole that I used to. So,
Yeah,
but like everything else like is good, right? The numbers that aren't nearly as leverage dependent. So I think it's good to be mindful of that, like what numbers you're looking at and looking at the whole picture. because it's like right now, like my squat numbers, yeah, technically aren't up to 100% of like what I was when I'm 200 pounds, but like my leg extension's at an all-time high. So, and then like you think about the squat, right? Like all the best squatters in the world are the super heavyweights.
Yeah, yeah,
There's a reason for that. Not all the best deadlifters are, but all the best squatters are super heavyweights. There's a reason for that. That's not just because they're more muscular, it's because it's just a different movement, right? So that's
yeah,
a tangent, sort of a tangent, but
yeah.
yeah,
That reminds me, fat redistribution. It's a very interesting thing
yeah,
because throughout the entire prep, uh, it was just about getting your lower half in. And
yeah,
now it's like, we're up 15 and, we still see, sartorius from hip to knee. We still see
yeah,
glute in your side poses. And it's like, where's this going? Because it's not going to your upper half. And so it's been a very interesting thing. And I think a lot of it has to do with just how your body's just handling the food. So that's an interesting area. I think it needs to be explored a little bit more often. But we need more guys who can handle their post show phase with control.
yeah, yeah.
Thanks for doing this, man. I think the followers will greatly appreciate this.
Yeah, hopefully, yeah, get some value out of this conversation and gives a different perspective on, some of the approaches that are taken these days and maybe help somebody else to have a successful transition phase because we all know like that is probably the hardest part of the whole thing is that transition coming out. So this is by far the most successful transition phase I've ever had. Like I said, mentally, physically, all of the above. And I would love to see others be able to experience that as well because I mean, this is the stage that, a lot of athletes and people get burnt out. I actually literally just had a conversation like right before we jumped on this call about, specific athletes that have gotten burnt out after a season. And it's just, yeah, it's a
Yeah,
tough time, but yeah,
yeah, yeah, I think that has a lot to do with why people burn out. Say you go through a show prep and say it's even successful and you get what you want out of your placings. Um, you got all the negative effects that come with the prep, and then you haven't resolved all of those just yet. Now you're dealing with all of that, and you don't look awesome anymore. And so it's like you can see how people burn out very easily when going through a prep or finishing a prep after they gone through a binge or something like that. So it's if you're looking to stay in the sport for as long as you can, I think this is a key component to it.
sure. Agreed.
Cool. All right. Thanks, bro.
Absolutely.